As we sat in the semi-darkness, my grandmother began to serve us the evening meal. She ladled hare stew into our bowls from the large cauldron that hung above the hearth. As she did this, my mother busied herself lighting the small lamps that were strategically placed around our wooden house. I took a bite of the stew. The meat was tender, and the garlic and herb-flavored gravy dribbled from my chin. In addition to the stew, my grandmother had baked barley bread. It had just been removed from the hot ashes in the bottom of the fire, and everything tasted delicious. I had a large family, and we all lived together in one long rectangular house. Almost all aspects of family life took place in the central hall of our home, though my mother had a separate room for spinning and weaving at the back of the house. As I devoured my dinner, I looked around at the people I loved. I wanted to keep their faces imprinted in my memory forever. Soon I would be leaving them and sailing far away to a land in the midst of the Western Ocean, the land of Iceland, known for its strange fires, boiling streams, and ice-covered mountains. The journey there would be treacherous, and there were reports that the oceans were filled with gigantic whales and even sea monsters. I knew what the journey to Iceland would be like because my father had made it himself when he was my age. I had listened to the saga of his voyage in a cargo ship with his brothers, Vali and Tuni. His brothers had stayed in Iceland and become successful farmers, and my father had returned to Norway and married my mother. I did not want to make that dangerous journey and leave my loved ones, but I knew I had to leave with other young Norse to escape the conflict. As we ate, the adults sat on the raised beds that served both as seats and as places to sleep. The children sat cross-legged on the earthen floor. My grandparents, Bjork and Affie, my younger brother, Arsten and Carl, and my sister Kitta began to chat about their day. My favorite hen did not lay any eggs today, said Kitta, clearly disappointed. Perhaps she will lay twice as many eggs tomorrow, replied my grandfather Affie. It was Kitta's job to tend the chickens. All of our animals were kept in pens behind our house. Each day Kitta watered and fed the chickens and collected the eggs. Arsten was in charge of caring for our 5 goats. He fed them and milked them, and he liked to play chase with them too. We also had 3 cows. It was Carl's job to care for them, but Mother and Kitta milked them and churned the sweet-tasting milk until it turned to butter. My closest friend in the whole world was my cousin Toli. Toli and I had had many adventures together. Thankfully, Toli would be traveling to Iceland with me. At least there was that. Hey Bjorn, do you want to go down to the harbor to see if the men have finished loading the longships for our journey? I'll race you, Toli exclaimed. For several seconds we stared at each other, unblinking and eyeing the doorway. There weren't any windows in our house. The small opening in the thatched roof allowed only a small amount of the smoke from the fire to escape, and hardly any light from the sun to enter. Despite the permanent smoky haze in the house, I could see that Toli was contemplating running to the doorway, and he was determined to get a head start on me. Suddenly, in perfect unison, we both jumped up and sprinted toward the doorway. Toli made it out first, but he slipped in a puddle. I leapt into the air and jumped clear over him. I took the lead, sprinting forward as fast as I could. Outside the sun had set, and many stars as well as a full moon were already visible in the evening sky. A few of the dirt roads in our town were covered with planks of wood. This allowed wagons loaded with goods and supplies to be moved about our town more easily. However, many of the streets were simply dirt tracks, and now, because of the rain, they were a series of mud baths. It wasn't long before I slipped and fell too. Immediately, Toli was upon me with a handful of mud. He threw it at me, and I responded by pushing him into a deep, muddy puddle. Before long, we were wrestling in the muddy streets. I often found myself in situations like this when Toli was with me. I sometimes thought that Tully's behavior was influenced by the trickster giant Loki, who, despite his bad behavior, had been invited to live with the Viking gods in Asgard. The sound of our raucous laughter disturbed our neighbor, Ern the carpenter. As he and his family were preparing to go to sleep for the night, he came to his doorway and ordered us to be quiet. We immediately did what he asked and ran toward the harbor. The harbor was a magical place. Despite our fear of night spirits, we loved to go there in the evening and watch the ocean waves as they lapped back and forth against the imposing longships. Other vessels were tied up and docked there for the night, too. There were fishing boats, rowboats, and ferries used for carrying passengers across rivers and fjords. Because most people in my homeland lived on or near the coast, or near a river or fjord, boats of various sizes and shapes were our main form of transportation. Because we were master ship builders, our ships were known far and wide for their design, speed, and ability to move easily through the waters. In a matter of days, Tully and I would be traveling on board a cargo ship called a nar. Many of the supplies we needed for the journey had already been loaded aboard the vessel. They were stowed in the center of the ship and were covered with animal hide to protect them from the rain and powerful waves. We would also be taking supplies of iron, tar, barley, and cloth to trade in the farmstead of Reykjavik. Once in Iceland, the cargo ship would be reloaded with much needed food supplies, and then it would return as swiftly as it could to our homeland. Bjorn, look, Tully whispered suddenly. It looks like there are some people on board that longship over there. Do you see the torchlight? I have an idea. Let's pretend that we are spies and sneak up on them, he continued, pointing at the boat. Okay, I whispered, not all sure that it was such a good idea, but not surprised that Tully had already lost interest in our cargo ship. Follow me to the harbor, Bjorn. Stay right behind me. Okay, let's go, Tully commanded. Tully inched forward, moving silently. I followed him and moved quietly too. I was determined to stay as close to him as possible. We both peered into the growing darkness, all the while moving closer to the flickering light on the longship.